Welcome to Awaken the Mind, the NLP and Hypnosis Guide, hosted by David Uhas.
You're listening to Awaken the Mind, the NLP and Hypnosis Guide, a podcast that inspires the curious to the professional to discover meaningful content and pursue their passions. My name is David Uhas, and I'm a master NLP practitioner and hypnotist, best known for losing over 100 pounds and running 6 marathons in 2 years. And I'm sitting down with hypnotists, NLP practitioners, and coaches to talk about their process, the lessons they've learned, and how to make an impact in the lives of others. Our guest today is Adam Fleming, and he is a transformational leadership coach with 10 years professional experience helping entrepreneurs and nonprofit leaders work at change. He's fun, friendly, transparent, and down to earth. Adam is also artistic, uses lots of metaphors, and often refers to popular stories, art, music, and film when working with clients. While he offers shorter-term engagements, he found the most fulfilling thing about being a coach is working with clients over the long term, partnering with them to finish well. Adam was trained and certified by Lifeforming Leadership Coaching in Virginia Beach, Virginia in 2009, and is credentialed as a professional certified coach by the International Coach Federation. Adam lives in the South Bend, Indiana area with his wife and 4 children. His primary outlet for his creative side is writing. Adam has published 10 books since 2012. And give our guest today a warm welcome, Adam Fleming. Hello, Adam.
Hello, David. Thanks for having me. This is such an honor and privilege to be with you today.
Oh, well, thank you. It's an honor for me as well. I'm excited that you are here. And you have some very interesting and unique coaching background that I'm excited to learn more about. So you're from Indiana. We're actually neighbors. We were talking about that a little bit before the show. How's the weather there?
It's actually beautiful outside right now, clear and sunny, and it's real nice. I love June. May is my favorite month, but that wasn't very long ago, so. We still got the flowers, and the strawberries are coming out now. So fresh garden strawberries are a big deal.
Do you garden?
My wife does most of it, but I grew up actually on an organic strawberry farm in central Illinois. So strawberries have kind of always been a thing for me.
That's like the lottery for any kid growing up, I would say.
Well, I ate my fill by the time I was 12, probably a lifetime's worth of strawberries, and now I prefer blueberries.
Yeah. And tell me about yourself growing up, hobbies, interests, where you were born, role models, family, schools, anything you want to share.
Man, that's a lot of different options I can pull from there. I grew up, as I said, on a farm. Organic strawberries were the cash crop. And so that was kind of an interesting introduction to life. There are 150 acres out there in central Illinois and a lot of wildlife, spent a lot of time in the woods and a lot of time reading. Was not allowed to have a television. So we were kind of a country family, and I did a lot of reading. And so one of my favorite things to do was read novels, even at a young age. And it's still something I still believe in for coaches or people who want to develop their empathy. And actually, one of my books does talk about that a little bit, is the idea that in psychology, the idea of theory of mind is something that we develop in terms of empathy, that we actually can maybe developing our empathy better when we read fiction. So that's one of my favorite things to do. Let's see, boy, you really made it broad. Well, I came to Goshen, Indiana, to go to college, and I met my wife here. Started working just in a woodworking shop, and one day I said to this guy I worked with, "Hey, I haven't had a mentor for a while. Would you mentor me?" And he said, "No, but I'll coach you." And I was probably 32 years old at the time, and I said, whatever you want to call it, man. I would be happy to have this gentleman's probably about 15 years older, and I wanted to get some invite him to invest in my life. And as he began to coach me, I began to see that, hey, I've always been an encouraging type of person, and I love to encourage people. But I began to understand the reason he agreed to coach me for almost no money was because he was going through a training program at the time. And this training program was giving him these tools and skills that he was acquiring that you could, I always kind of thought of myself as a mad encourager, right? So I just love to encourage people. And this was like a methodology. So it's like, I call it the method to my madness, is having a skill set and a methodology and a way of doing coaching that is specific. And so as I watched how he coached me, I said, man, this is something I really want to do for other people, to learn this skill set and be able to provide that for others. So I started getting training at a fairly young age, and I think the entire class of whatever 30 people that I was going through coach training with, they were probably most of them were 10 years older or more. And so I was going through coach training at a pretty young age there at 35. This was kind of before Zoom was, video conferencing was popular back in 2008, 2007. But yeah, a lot of telephone calls and then 3 on-site workshops that year where I had to go to Virginia for 3 or 4 days of real intensive classroom training. So yeah, so and that took me a year.
And that's actually the sign of a really good school that, there are a lot of coaches out there that, maybe have done something online, and there's a lot of really good online programs, but to actually meet in person, my training was that way. It was over a year's time. It was such a cool group of people, and still friends with those people today. I'm sure you still are connected with those people in some way.
Yeah, I keep in touch with some of them on Facebook. I think one of the head trainer at the school was, I had her do some mentor coaching for me a couple of years ago. And I guess that school is primarily a lot of people who are in nonprofit or pastoral work. People in the Christian world are going there, and a lot of them over the years have not gone on to seek credentialing with the International Coach Federation. So she told me that she thought I was one of only maybe a handful from the entire history of that school that have actually gone on and done that. So
that's something else worth mentioning, that you are accredited through the International Coach Federation. Can you talk about that a little bit? Some of our listeners are interested in coaching or interested in NLP hypnosis.
yeah.
I know that there's a lot of people out there that are really interested in getting accredited, but I don't understand how that process works.
Well, that's a good question. And by the way, I'm quite fascinated by hypnosis. I was in a BNI group for a while with a counselor who was also a hypnotist or a hypnosis practitioner. And I thought, wow, that's a really cool concept. I've never gotten any training in it. But I think that's kind of back to the gist of your question is training. And then, why is it important to get some kind of certificate or credential? That's not just an online class, or not just a weekend, like a 1 weekend thing or a 4-hour primer course, but something that's really full-fledged. And that kind of comes back to, maybe you've got some natural skill sets. Maybe you are naturally gifted as an encourager. And whenever you talk to people and they say to you, oh man, whenever I talk to you, I'm just so encouraged when we're, after we're done. But that is no substitute really for learning the discipline really of only speaking 20% of the time in a given hour, the discipline of not giving advice and how to ask questions that don't presume advice, such as, don't you think you ought to get a coaching certificate? Well, that's not really a question. It's an advice that's, couched in a question, but it's not, the advice is transparently there. So learning how to ask questions that are powerful, that are open-ended, that don't presume that you as the coach know the answer, that frankly, it just takes training. I don't think that some of those skills are things that you can just acquire or naturally have. And so, and their paradigm shifts, especially for people who have careers that have led them in sort of a lifetime of dishing out advice, as one of my trainers said, grabbing the big black book of advice behind them on the shelf and like laying it out and saying, okay, I got the advice for you. Learning how to, discipline yourself to not give advice is a challenge, and it's a paradigm shift. And so it's well worth the money that you spend and the time that you spend to develop yourself that way. Cool. I'm a huge proponent, as you can tell. Now, I don't think that everyone needs to be that, and we'll talk about this later, but some of the international work that I'm doing right now has kind of required me to go that direction. And so I started getting my I.C.F certification last year after being a coach for 10 years, having good training behind me, but not having ever gone to that level. But then realizing that some of the international work that I wanted to do was going to require me to have some of that kind of stuff under my belt. I went ahead and pursued it, and it was a chore. I'll tell you, it wasn't easy, and it wasn't. There's a fair amount of hoop jumping, just being honest. But I think I think in the future. So my trainers said 10 years ago, oh, you don't need that, and most people from that training program never got it. But I was only 35 when I completed it. Coaching had only been around for 10 years. Now it's been around for 20 years. And as I'm 45, I'm looking ahead to the next 20 years saying, I do believe that in the next 20 years, this is going to become an important thing. And that there's going to be a time when, I'm not necessarily excited about the government dipping its fingers into the pie, but the reality is that could happen, and I want to be prepared for that. So,
sure.
So those are some of the reasons why I decided that it was worth pursuing, in spite of the fact that there's cost and effort involved in getting it.
Kudos to you, because I know from the trainers from the school that I'd gone through how difficult it was for them anyway. Definitely impressive, as well as anybody that's wanting to get into coaching, well worth going through a program like that, because that when you're doing learning that's hands-on like that, you just can't get that out of a book. I'm impressed that you've written 12 books. One book is impressive, let alone 12 books. Tell me about the 12 books. That's really cool.
Sure. Well, I like to write fiction. So I've got several books out that are just novels, just fun stories. I also have a co-author in Colorado, and so we've written some of these together. We wrote 3 books about a Texan. It's kind of a cross between like Walker, Texas Ranger, and Forrest Gump. So he sort of travels the world in search of justice and a good piece of steak, and some of that kind of thing. And then I have a couple books that are more in the coaching world too, as well. So one of them is called The Art of Motivational Listening. And the second one is How to Make a Positive Cultural Impact. So those are on Amazon. If you search my name, Adam G. Fleming. How to Make a Positive Cultural Impact talks some about the research that I've done. Well, I didn't do the research. I just read the research papers from the psychologists at the University of York in Ontario, and read some research papers that are looking into what does reading fiction do for the growth of our empathy. So I like to write fiction, and I actually prefer to read fiction than to read all these, business growth books and even coaching books. To be honest, I'd rather read a good story than read a book about coaching. so anyhow, so that's 8 of my books, I think, are novels, and one of them sort of got some poetry, and then a couple of books in the coaching world as well.
I am one of those who had thought, fiction, I don't want to say was wasteful time, but there was a part of me that I just didn't find myself reading that kind of material. I definitely
Yeah.
like, watching movies but tell me, that's very interesting what you said about how it relates with building empathy.
Well, obviously, there's still exploration happening at the university, and the academics are studying this stuff. And I am not an academic. I might have gone to seminary, except that I was just like, that's totally not for me. I want to encourage people. I want to be with people, and I want to, that kind of thing. And so I really don't think of myself as an academic. And it was a little bit of a stretch for me in researching this book to actually go down to the university library here in town and say, hey, I'm looking for some of these papers, but I can't figure out how to find them online and have them actually, the librarian was super nice and printed off, like 20-page research papers that I kind of waded through for like, what's the real idea here? Because there's a lot of, research jargon that I don't even get. But there's this correlation between reading a story where your mind, so obviously when you watch a movie, they do a lot of the work for you. They show you the scene, they play music for you, they depict the character for you, both with acting and like what do they look like? Are they blonde or brunettes or all those things. When you read a book, you have to do all that work yourself. So your brain is doing this exercise where you are, trying to get into another person's shoes. And that exercise that you're doing is beginning to be linked now with what is the correlation between that exercise and empathy. For example, one question that's still kind of, the jury's still out on this is, do people read fiction because they have empathy, or does reading fiction build people's empathy? Are they more attracted to it because they already have some empathetic tendencies, or is it the reading itself that helps build those tendencies? And I think it probably, maybe it goes both ways sometimes. I've heard this theory that, oh, well, maybe that's just a waste of time. Because it does take some energy, it takes some time, and a lot of people fall asleep when they start reading. And I get that. I read before bed too, and sometimes a couple weeks goes by before I've finished a book too. But I'm fascinated by that concept. I'm glad the academics are studying it because I think it's important for us practitioners of empathy to know about. And I think whether you're, in hypnosis, counseling, coaching, any of these kind of people helping disciplines, that exercising that, what they call theory of mind, and that's capitalized, theory of mind, building your empathy is a helpful thing. So I promote writing fiction, and maybe I'm kind of self-serving in doing that because I want people to read my fiction books too.
Well, and I didn't mean to be disrespectful about fiction reading or writing. My kids, they love to read, and I'm very proud of them. Daughter Shelby, she's the middle girl, and she has done a lot of work with writing, kind of like the mashups, the Lincoln and Vampire, mashed together kind of stuff, but with musicians that she likes to listen to.
They call it fan fiction.
What I believe you're saying is almost like on a neurological level, you're building those pathways that allow you to look for more, getting into the shoes of somebody.
Yeah.
And, yeah, because that can be a stretch. I mean, even as a coach, I remember early on, that was kind of a muscle that I had to build with, when I would react with a client, to be able to see the good in them and to see the possibilities in them. Very fascinating. I really appreciate you sharing that with me. Very cool.
Yeah, sure.
Something else that you mentioned that was really fascinating is this working with change readiness. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. So I hadn't heard of it before a couple of years ago as well, and ran into this guy on LinkedIn. His name is Dr. Steve Barlow, another academic. I love to team up with academics because I'm just a practitioner and I need these smart guys. Now I'm a pretty smart guy too. I prefer not to be the researcher. So Dr. Barlow was a clinical counselor doing anger management in maximum security prisons in Australia. And he was wondering, how's come if I'm, as a counselor, he's giving tips and information on how to manage your anger. And he's finding that, maybe 1 out of 10 of those incarcerated gentlemen he's working with are accessing what he's telling them and actually implementing it. And he's going, what is the difference between this one guy and these other 9, that one is able to implement things to help him manage his anger? And so that's kind of what kicked him off into the research for his doctorate, which ended up being in a field we're calling change fitness. So in the world of change management, which is kind of a burgeoning world in the business world and corporate world, people have these change management initiatives. And the findings ever since they started studying it in the 1940s are that 70% of those change management initiatives fail. So there's a question: what is it that helps people in a corporate environment or in a business environment, or even just an individual who's trying to implement change in their lives? What is it that is really needed for them to be able to implement change? And it really boils down to the difference between fitness and readiness. So when I say I'm ready for a marathon, let's say there's a marathon this Saturday in Chicago, and I'm going to go run. So I sign up, I put on my running shoes, and I get the number on my chest, and I show up and I go, okay, I'm just about ready. Let me smoke my last pack of cigarettes, and and then I smoke 5-6 cigarettes, and I go, okay, I'm ready. Well, could you say I'm ready? Yes, you could. I've got my shoes on. I'm standing at the starting line, and someone told me it's 26 miles. So I know how far I got to go, and I've bought into the idea, right? I know exactly what the program is. I've bought in and everything, but am I fit enough? Now, I gave you a hint that maybe I'm not, because I smoked a pack of cigarettes first. I'm also not a runner these days. I used to be, but I wouldn't be able to complete that marathon. So while my readiness may be at 100%, my fitness might only be at 15. So the concept here is change fitness is a psychological fitness level that Dr. Barlow had some psychometric test makers build him a test so he can measure somebody's change fitness on a bell curve against, the rest of the population. So you can figure out if you're more or less average or what. And then he developed a program using positive psychology and narrative psychology and those types of things, with a series of videos and a series of journaling exercises. Just like going to a gym to get you more physically fit, you can go to the Change Gym and get more psychologically fit for change. Now, what we're seeing with the people that we work with over 12 weeks is that when we give them that psychometric test before and after, that typically they've increased their change fitness by 45%. So it's pretty neat to not only have a 12-week program that we can take people through, but also be able to show them measurable, tangible results. And so psychological change fitness is this additional factor that so far the change management world in the corporate environment hasn't begun to recognize yet, which is why you haven't heard of it.
Of course, there's a lot of crossover with all the different modalities and everything, and
Sure.
Whatever works, right?
Yeah.
A very fascinating person from Indiana, also Matthew Bennett. He wrote a book called Connecting Paradigms, and it was based in motivational interviewing. And I actually first learned about that in a freedom from smoking program through the American Lung Association. And there were 2 questions that just blew my mind. So simple. One of them was, how committed are you to make this change? And the other one was, how confident are you that you will be successful at making this change? And that is a really good tool when I'm working with clients with smoking specifically to kind of gauge where they're at, because there's a distinction between those two questions. With fitness, can you share a little bit more about what in somebody's life or behavior affects their readiness for fitness for change?
For change, fitness for change. Well, first of all, we start by teaching them the trans-theoretical model for change, which is that change has 5 stages. The 5 stages of change are beginning with not thinking about change is stage 1, thinking about change, planning, taking action, and sustaining. So those, the trans-theoretical model is the most widely adopted, kind of academic model for what change looks like. So we start by teaching them that just so they understand change itself. And then he's put together 7 different factors, and I'll just give you 2 of them, just so we don't get in the weeds too much. But one is motivation, so that's not too surprising, and another one is trust, which I think is a little bit surprising, or at least it was when I began to learn it. And then there's 5 others, and these factors all kind of fit together. That are things that, boy, if you've got low motivation and low trust, you've got 2 out of 7 factors that are low on that dial. And again, using some teaching and some journaling methodology, and then obviously working with a coach to help you stay on track, make sure you're doing your exercises first, and then also helping you debrief those exercises and that journaling. You begin to build those 7 different areas psychologically, so that you're stronger in all of them, and that makes a composite that's stronger. That's the gist of it.
With the trust, is that like trust with self or trust with others? Or when you say trust, what do you mean?
I would say yes and. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, trusting others it's really difficult to change if you don't trust others. I saw someone post on a Facebook group that you and I think that where we met, and they asked the question the other day, how many people here are self-made, and how many self-made who didn't have a mentor or a coach or a teacher? And my response was like immediate, like, I don't think there's anybody that's self-made without some kind of mentor, coach, teacher. Right. You just don't do it yourself. It's just not, the question didn't even compute to me that someone could say, well, I'm completely self-made. I've never had anybody help me along the way. I was like, you have to trust somebody to get where you're at. I mean, David, you had to trust somebody to get where you're at today, or you wouldn't be sitting here. You had to trust the tailor, that made that shirt or whatever, That's one of my strengths finders is interconnectedness. What is it? Connectedness, I think, is one of my top strengths finders. So everything's connected, and we've got to trust other people, because we're going to need their help to get where we're going.
Absolutely.
And we certainly have to trust ourselves as well.
When someone is exhibiting maybe behaviors that are self-sabotaging and they don't realize they're doing it, can you share with the listeners about the value of coaching for somebody who knows absolutely nothing about coaching?
Oh, that's a fun one. The value of coaching. If you don't know anything about coaching, have you ever used a mirror? If you've used a mirror to comb your hair, brush your teeth, shave, pluck your eyebrows, any of that stuff, how much more difficult would that be to do well and accurately without that mirror? I think of coaching as being a mirror for someone. It's not necessarily telling them anything that they didn't already know. Like, for example, when you look in a mirror, you already know you have a nose, and you know you have 2 eyes and a mouth. You figured that out when you were 2 years old. You learned the names for all those things. And so when I'm holding up a mirror for someone, my job isn't to tell them things that they don't already know. It's just to help them see them better. That's just kind of off the top of my head, David, kind of a gut level reaction. There's so much more that goes into coaching and that you can get out of coaching than just seeing yourself in a mirror.
That's a good metaphor, by the way.
I think it is a good, well, I told you I use metaphors a lot. So that's And that's kind of what I'll do with people. I've had people, kind of looking out the window and, oh, there's a woodpecker out there. And then I'll just, instead of allowing that distraction to get me derailed from asking them questions about their current problem or challenge, I'll just say, how's your current situation like a woodpecker or something like that? And they'll go, I don't know. And then you get like all kinds of mileage out of that for half an hour, So I think that's a good metaphor. I think there's more to it, but maybe we'll just stop there.
There's learning that I get that I don't see in myself, just like you're saying with that mirror. And also accountability. When I did my very first coaching with somebody before I became a coach, I was amazed how much I got done. And it was mind-blowing how motivated I was.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there was a period where I'm like, I was running into my own, not being accountable. And that was learning as well. And again, having, sometimes, with your metaphor about the reflection being like a physical thing, there's also that reflection of accountability, holding someone in that place of a learning about behaviors.
I love to talk about accountability, and I think for people who've never been coached before, that can be a scary word. And so I like to talk about it as, I like to put healthy in front of the word accountability. And maybe if you're thinking about a mirror, if I'm shaving and I nick my neck, I need that mirror to tell me, hey, you got blood, or else, you gotta somehow close that up, put a little tissue on there or something. And so when I talk about how I love to work with my clients who are kind of long-term and want to finish well, my longest standing client right now is 74, 75 years old. And he's done 90 hours of coaching with me now in the last 4 years or so. He's clearly never too old to learn, never too old to grow, never too old to have accountability, to have somebody ask him questions with an outside perspective. And so healthy accountability is really, you bring yourself to it. And if you think about combing your hair, you're really holding yourself accountable to look good when you walk out the door. When we're being coached is when we bring ourselves to accountability. That's what we want, is we want to walk out the door with our hair looking right. We don't want to look stupid because we screwed up and nobody was there to tell us, hey, this sounds like you're off track. Basically with your core values, like what are your core values, and then are you living them? So if you're not living them, somebody needs to say, what's going on with your core values? So that may be, you may be a politician who wants to not have an affair because that's going to not end well. Or you may have, any number of other core values that you want to live out, and you don't want to stumble with that. Because if you do, something bad will happen. Anyway, I love accountability. I think it's awesome, but I think it's worth talking about how positive it is when you bring yourself to it and when you ask for it, as opposed to people thinking, typically when we see accountability, the word in the news media, it's like, we're going to hold that politician accountable, which means it's already kind of too late. In fact, I heard Tony Robbins talking one time. I'm not a huge Tony Robbins fan, but I thought this was well said. The interviewer asked him, has there ever been a time when you told somebody you couldn't coach them? And he said, well, yeah, Bill Clinton called me after the Monica Lewinsky thing came out, and I told him, sorry, you should have called me 2 years ago. It's too late now. So the accountability happens before you screw up. That's what it's there for. It's not, don't go get a coach after you've messed up. Then you may need some other kind of help. I thought, well, Tony put that pretty well. And I was impressed with that. So
my children, of course, relationships it's not a coaching relationship. Sometimes I have to remind myself that and be the dad, not the coach.
That's true.
One of the things that I will take the time to very carefully and lovingly share with them is about how important accountability is, because the only thing we control in this world are our choices, and the only influence we have in this world is keeping our word. And if we don't keep our word with ourselves, we don't trust ourselves. And if we lose that accountability, not only with ourselves and the trust with ourselves, but also with others. And it's so important because, like you said earlier, we can't do this alone. We do need other people to lift us up, as well as people that we can lift up.
Right. And I like how you said that. I mean, if you don't keep your own word, you break down trust with yourself, not only other people. And if you break down trust with yourself, then we kind of come back to change fitness. Is your fitness psychologically for making more change in the future is deteriorating because you have less belief in yourself that you'll do it. Because then next time you say, well, I'm going to do this, I really am, and then you don't, well, you just keep eroding it. So it's trusting yourself. Accountability can help build trust in yourself because that coach is also believing in you. They are actually loaning you some of their trust and some of their belief that you can get this done, even when maybe you're not entirely sure that you can. And they loan you some of that, and then you get it done, and then your trust in yourself builds up a little bit, and you can see that fitness, psychological fitness for change, that level just growing because you trust yourself more. So that's why trust is one of those factors. Coming back full circle to that conversation.
What's on your bucket list outside of coaching or with coaching?
Well, outside of coaching, I think one of the things that I just added to my bucket list when I hit 10 books a couple months ago is to do 25. So I've got to write 15 more books.
Wait, let me write this down. I'm writing this down. I'm going to hold you accountable. What, by
awesome.
when and how will I know?
I think I did write this down. 15 books by age 50, 5 years, 3 more books a year.
Cool.
So that would be 2024. You can check in with me. Have me come on and do another podcast.
Absolutely.
That'd be awesome. 15 more of those. One of my biggest hobbies is traveling. And so I'm actually on my way to Cairo next Monday.
Oh, nice.
And my family's getting ready to spend a year in Egypt. We're leaving at the end of July. So part of my bucket list is I don't know that there's a specific number of people I want to train, but I want to continue to do international coach training. And so I'll be doing some training next week in June. And then when we go for a year, I'll be doing training in Cairo and Alexandria for the better part of this coming school year, as my kids will be taking a year away from school at home. So I love to travel, and I guess I don't really have a number on this, but I think I've been to about 20 countries now. And I think this fall we're going to go to Oman, which is right next to Saudi Arabia and Yemen and the United Arab Emirates. Wow. So that'll be a new country on my bucket list. And I'd love to go to another 10 or 15 or 20 countries in my lifetime, but I don't really have a number nailed down or a plan or a SMART goal to do that. I think it's just gonna be a little bit more organic and in that process. But that's kind of what's coming up for me is a year in Egypt, and I'm pretty excited about that. We've been raising money through my nonprofit because we have to subsidize that. That's not something I'm getting paid tons of jack for, but I'm not doing it for the money, that's for sure. And I've been over to Egypt a couple times already. I've done some training in Kinshasa in the Democratic Republic of Congo back in 2015. And I just love it. I just love the cross-cultural element of, teaching coaching techniques and skills and teaching, kind of this recognizing that it's a North American culturally, it's a kind of a North American concept, and then inviting those trainees to contextualize it for themselves. There's just so many layers to that onion that's super fascinating to me. And it's very humbling. It requires me to be extremely my 10 years of experience are worth almost nothing in your culture, and I have to recognize that. So right from the get-go, I'm just going to be transparent that I don't know anything about you guys or how you live your lives. And I'm going to give you what I can, but you guys are going to have to figure out how to use it in your culture. It's a lot of fun. So, I hope, I don't have numbers with this, but I hope to spend the better part of the next 20 years doing international coach training, change fitness coaching, and writing novels and enjoying my kids.
If you could expand that sounded like you were talking about like a program where you're teaching a group of people, or do you do this with the corporate world or both?
Yeah, this is a program where I teach a group of people, usually somewhere between 20 and 30 people. Yeah, so what I'm doing in Egypt next week is we'll have a 12-hour workshop. So it's like over 2 days. And we're going to do that workshop in Cairo. We're also going to travel down to Alexandria, which is like a 4-hour drive, and do it there as well with a second group of people.
Nice.
And they want me to build a 60-hour course that could be credentialed eventually. So that's 5 weekends, really, over the course of a year. Those people would attend those workshops. So we're doing the first one next week, and then I'm going for a year. We'll do the other 4, and I've got to design that curriculum as well while I'm there. So I managed to design the first 12 hours of curriculum before going over for a short trip, and when I get there in August, I'll have to work at designing the other 48 hours of training. But so it's a huge ton of work. And then also when we move back to the States in 2020, I'll be looking for opportunities to take that 60-hour training, whether it's into the corporate world or into the nonprofit world, and train leaders in coaching skills. So it's really about learning how to listen. It's about learning how to be a coach, how to ask those powerful questions that I was talking about before. And training something I've been doing since 2010, only about a year after I graduated my program. I had some mentors in the business tell me, if you really want to solidify what you've learned, turn around and train other people in these skills. So I began doing, I'm talking like 6 or 8 hour curriculum type of like teaser courses, or just like mini trainings back then. But now I'm sort of ready to graduate to that full-fledged, like, here's 60 hours of curriculum. It's going to take 5 weekends and a whole year to complete type of thing. And looking forward to coming back to the States and then kind of making that the thrust of my business, along with some change fitness coaching with individuals, or in the change management world in corporate America. So I haven't entirely figured it all out. I'm sort of treating this year in Egypt as kind of a sabbatical to give myself some space to think about what do I want to do with the next 10 years. But I know I'll be writing books, and I know I'll be coaching and training people somehow. So,
and I just want to acknowledge, just listening to you talk, the saying, the net will appear, and you're just speaking into existence, your future. And somebody who is new to coaching, that's a very scary thing. I remember we had some trainings where we had to do something outside of our comfort zone to get that feeling of what it's like. But as I'm listening to you talk, I recognize you have that trust with yourself and that confidence with yourself. You hold yourself accountable. And I know that when you say, this is what's going to happen, in your heart, it's a done deal. It's just time that's got to pass and mechanics till it appears in the future. Because not everybody gets that, but you're like, yeah, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. I'm like, yeah, this is somebody who trusts himself. You got that way by having a lot of experience with making declarations of what you were going to do, and trust, and learning that you could trust yourself when you say you do something, you're going to do something, that you do it.
Yeah.
I mean, that might blow some people's mind when you start rattling that stuff off. They're like, oh my God. Maybe other coaches, absolutely, they'll get it. But some of our listeners are newbies.
Yeah. There's an interesting fine line and gray area between saying you're going to do it and feeling a sense of, you're questioning yourself. Like, is there a false sense of bravado here? Am I just BSing myself? And so you have to also kind of navigate that territory where you're saying it out loud, but you're also kind of like in your mind still questioning it a little bit. And I'll admit that's still there for me a little bit too. So I don't want people to get a false notion of, and I don't think you're giving them a false notion, but I don't want people to think, well, this guy's got it all figured out, because that I definitely don't. And you alluded to that, like you said, you know, you got to give it time. You got to figure out the mechanics of it. But there's a determination too that comes with speaking something out of your mouth and sort of claiming this into the ether, or, you know, kind of putting it out there and saying, this is what I'm going to go do. And I guess I've got a track record. So that also helps, right? Is when you've done stuff. Like for me to say I'm going to write another 15 books, well, I've done 10 already. It might have been preposterous when I started to say I'm going to write 25 books. So I just started by saying I'm going to write a book. And I got that one done. And so you kind of develop a threshold for tolerance, I think. Is that fair? I don't know a whole lot about the NLP or the world of hypnotism that sounds like you kind of come from, but
A balance.
Balance, yeah. Yeah.
Because you get feedback, okay, that was too far, or not far enough, right?
Uh-huh.
The coaching presupposition, and I think it's also an NLP presupposition, that there's no failure, only feedback. And so you get to assert these things that you want to do. It creates the cognitive dissonance, that stress feeling of, I'm not there yet, but here's where I'm at. And that's the motivating force for that. And but learning that balance of what you're capable of doing, and of course we're unlimited, is my belief.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I wouldn't be going to Egypt if I didn't have some a belief like that, because it's been a big project. And you know, pretty much all pro bono. So it's like my nonprofits raised small amounts, but this year it was like, we got to triple what we raised last year. Okay, let's go do it, you know, so we can go do this project. It's going to be great.
Tell me about, what do you want to be remembered for? How do you want to be remembered?
Somebody once asked a really great coaching question that was, if you could, I'm going to change the question a little bit, but I think it answers the same question. If you could press a red button and change something in the world for everyone, what would it be? And I said, everybody ought to have at least one good friend. And I think that there is an aspect of friendship in coaching that you might not have with a counselor. It's not appropriate with a counselor, in fact, based on how their discipline operates. But I want to be remembered as a great friend, as someone who people just said, man, that guy was 100% behind me. Every time I did something, he was a great friend. That's what I want to be remembered for.
What's the best way for our listeners to get a hold of you?
Yeah, if they're interested in the change fitness stuff, they really ought to go to Dr. Barlow's website, thechangegym.com.
Okay.
GYM, like a gymnasium. thechangegym.com. If they want to get a hold of me, they can simply email me at adam.fleming.lifecoach@gmail.com. Fleming's with one M. Let's see. Oh, yeah, I have a website too that refers a little bit more to my books. So that one is www.adamgfleming.com. I've got some blogs on there, and you can certainly interact with me there. And then Adam G. Fleming, Adam G. Fleming author, I think, at Facebook. So it kind of depends if they want to connect with me as an author. Another place to go is just Amazon and look up Adam G. Fleming. You'll see all my books that available there. And check out, especially if you're interested in the whole, do I really have to read books? Do I have to read fiction? Check out my nonfiction book called How to Make a Positive Cultural Impact, and you'll get a little bit deeper look. And it's very short. It's a very short book. You get a little deeper look at why fiction is important. So that's How to Make a Positive Cultural Impact, and you can find it on Amazon.
I will include all of those links on the website. And I have to say, I've learned so much today when I interview somebody. that I learned what I didn't know that I didn't know about somebody. Thank you for being here today.
Yeah.
Please come back, and also have an awesome time in Egypt. And I wish you well with all the incredible things that you're doing.
Well, thanks for the invitation, and to all your listeners, thanks for tuning in.
Thank you for joining us today with Awaken the Mind, hosted by David Juhasz.
Relax. Awaken the mind. You need to understand. If you can't, you must. And if you must, you can. Now that I got you, let me put you in a trance. Got you feeling hypnotic. Your mind, let me massage it. Your thoughts are getting quiet. Your stress subsiding. You starting to see images, but it ain't no mirages. Think it's time to calibrate. Take a breath and concentrate. Get into your subconscious. Time to feel the energy, the brain waves. Let's go deep into your memory. Beware of self. Let the worries melt. All you see is you and you don't see no one else. Auditory digital, talking to yourself. It might seem bizarre, a feeling you never felt. This is your time to shine. Awaken the mind, the NLP and hypnosis guide. Yeah.